Okay, so Alanna, I'm really, really glad to be with you and welcome to the Mental Life podcast. And I'm excited to get into your book, which I have a copy here and have read, The Way of the Satisfied Woman, Reclaiming Feminine Power, and more about you and your work and what you've been doing. So I'd like to just start by having you just share a little bit about yourself, kind of what your kind of origin story is, where you came from, where you grew up, and kind of where this then fits with, the decision to write a book. I
Sure.
know what that's like. I've written a number of books myself, and I know it's a big deal. It's like having kids in some
It,
way and a lot of
yeah,
energy. So
it
please tell
certainly
us a
is.
little bit more about you.
Well, thank you so much, Jed. It's a wonderful honor and a pleasure to be here and speak with you today on the podcast. I'll try to keep my story into kind of a nutshell version because it has many different paths. But I did originally was born in Texas, grew up in Colorado, eventually moved to New York City and rooted myself in work around yoga and spirituality for many years. And that's where I first started learning more about masculinity and femininity. There's quite a lot of that literature and talk and research and knowledge in Eastern mysticism. And it was something that was really alive for me for, all the time that I was teaching yoga or teaching spirituality and doing that work. And I was recognizing how disparate the knowledge and teachings of masculinity and femininity were, and the way that we were attempting to live it here in America or in the West, really, that for me as a woman, it was difficult to feel feminine. So much of what we're taught is feminine actually isn't. And the things that are powerfully feminine are very much devalued and diminished. And so, in response, me, like many other women in this culture, ended up trying to fit myself into a culture that wasn't really built for me as a feminine woman, donning the mask of the masculine too much, armoring myself up for the world, pursuing success at all costs. I ended up building a business that was multi seven figures, and I was absolutely exhausted and actually more stressed and anxious than I've ever been in my life in that particular model. Although on all external, measurements, I was successful. I had written a few books about yoga and mythology. I'd gotten a PhD. I'd done everything that I thought I was supposed to do to affirm success and meaning in this life, and I just felt really empty. Coincidental with that, I also ended up in a marriage that wasn't right for me because of my own hyper masculine armor that I was putting on to try to brave myself for this world. I ended up attracting a man who was not only on the feminine polarity, but really in his wounded feminine. So that created a very difficult dynamic between us. To put it bluntly, I ended up playing mommy for him and trying to coach him through a lot of his emotional turmoil and depression. And it didn't work out, is the short version. It was a really difficult and toxic relationship. And on the outset of that, I had a bit of I guess one could call it a kind of crisis of faith. I realized how unhappy I was in this career that I'd built for myself. I realized that the relationships I was cultivating really weren't serving me. And I went back to this knowledge and this research that I had been doing about masculinity and femininity and wondering like why isn't this fitting me? Why isn't this matching me? Why isn't this serving my life? Why can't I live this? So I decided to make a radical move, Jed. I sold the business. I moved across the country and I essentially went all in on this work. And that was the inception of the book. I knew I had to get this knowledge out there to women to give them some support on how to actually redirect their lives in this culture, in this modern day, in a way that honors their femininity, brings it forward. Because I'm sure, as you and your listeners know, when each of us is in our more primary polarity in a balanced way, everyone thrives. So that's my goal with the satisfied woman.
It's great. Well, I certainly resonate with that, and over the years and the work that I've done with men and women as well, I've had some of that same experience.
Yeah.
And I think men also have been trying to break out of these boxes that we've been taught are supposed to be what men are
Yeah.
being. And I've seen unhappily many women, as you're describing, who've gotten in trying to be more active in the world, have gotten into the same bad
Right.
box that men have been in, and
Yep.
end up getting the worst of both worlds. So
Yeah.
I want to you talk a bit in the book about the feminine,
Hmm.
and I'd like you to talk a little bit more about what that means and how it ties into the masculine, because I think we're both talking about a more enlightened, a more healthy, a more, satisfying femininity and masculinity. And I wonder how that comes together for you in the book and in your life.
Sure, absolutely. So masculinity and femininity, they're really just psychological energies. They're energies that occupy our psyches. Every human has them. We all have both masculine and feminine. So either, any of us in any physical form are able to call forth masculinity and femininity in their appropriate times when we need them. But naturally, on our own, we tend to lean more toward one polarity or the other. And for those of us who lean more toward the feminine, who embody more of that feminine nature, and particularly those of us who are feminine in a woman's body, we have some special gifts. And there are a lot of wonderful qualities of femininity. I like to name first the two superpowers that I identify of femininity, which are our intuition and our emotional depth. And what's interesting is these are the things that really resonate most strongly for us as feminine women. These are the things that really balance out the two strong gifts of the masculine, which are logic and reason. So we need both in the world. Unfortunately, this dominant culture has positioned intuition as being scary, witchy, dangerous. It's positioned the emotions of women as being crazy, irrational, invalid. And so even women see these superpowers as something they need to hide, diminish, dismiss, um, negate in favor of logic and reason, which again throws them into the masculine. But emotional depth and intuition really are the heart of how a satisfied woman, certainly, but a woman moves in the world in the most incredible positive way. This is how she'll make meaning of her life, but also is a counterpoint and a counterbalance to masculinity because it helps direct both parties. It helps direct both energies. I like to think I'm a sailor, Jed. So I like to think in sailing metaphors that the feminine is back holding the tiller, kind of directing a little bit the course. And in sailing, you can't go directly to your destination. You have to tack back and forth. So it's not always linear. You have to work with nature. You can't force your way through. But the masculine is there at the prow of the ship. Whenever that course is set, it is directly charging through, making those clear pathways forward. Katie bar the doors, off we go. And the feminine is kind of back holding the tiller, feeling the wind, feeling the waves. And when the feeling shifts, and it does, the wind will shift slightly, the feminine can make that minor course correction, and the masculine continues to charge forth. So I think of the feminine as almost like the canary in the coal mine. When things for everybody are off balance, typically it's a woman's intuition or her feeling sensation that's going to go, something's not right here. And yet it's not going to be rational, so it's not always going to make sense. But the honoring or cherishing masculine will hear that discomfort in the feminine, ultimately course correct, and everyone benefits from it. So lots of qualities of the feminine, but those are the two
I
that I like
love
to
that.
center
I
first.
love that because it ties in with uh, a similar kind of metaphor that I've had for years and years, where, as you, I think we are all a mixture of
Yeah.
masculine and feminine. We all come from, in except very few exceptions, from male
Hmm.
sperm and female egg, and they
Hmm.
come together and make a person. And the way I hold that similar energy is I say that the inner feminine in all of us needs to be the one that directs,
Yes.
that we need to tune into that because
Yeah.
that intuition will help us see where we need to go. And
Yeah.
it's the job of the then masculine energy in my scheme to back up the feminine to once
Yeah.
we get clear to get us going. So it sounds very similar to what
Same page.
what exactly.
Yeah, totally same page. I love that and I appreciate that. And, I mean, I think there's a reason why we're on the same page. These are energies that are alive in our consciousness. They have been since the dawn of time. They are at the root of psychological principles. We all feel and experience them. So it isn't difficult to come to these similar conclusions because we all kind of feel on some level the truth of them, even though our culture today, I mean, hopefully we're moving toward it, but we're not quite living those truths just yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a number of things that I think are really unique and special about your book. One is that although it's written, mainly for women, men, I think will find it valuable as well.
I think so
Uh,
too.
Indeed. But it doesn't denigrate men. It doesn't see men as the enemy. It doesn't see men as the bad guys. And the other thing that it does that I think is unique is that we live at a time where there's many variations in masculine and feminine and how people identify.
Mhm.
And I think in some ways there's such a desire not to leave anybody out
Hmm.
that we don't say clearly,
Hmm.
who we're writing for.
Yeah.
And I just love this in yours, and I want to just speak it
Yeah,
out
go for
loud
it.
because it struck me. Because you said very specifically, I speak to people whose gender assigned at birth is female and who primarily express the feminine polarity. And in some ways, at this time in the culture, that's a courageous thing to say, because the truth is
Oh
that's
yeah.
where most of the people in the world,
Yeah.
not only in the human world, but the animal world, the plant world, you know, are identified as males or females. So
Yeah.
I want to have you just talk a little bit about how you decided to say that directly, uh, and also acknowledge there are other
Of
variations and
course.
people make other choices, but
Yeah.
you're very clear about where you're speaking. Talk a bit about how you
You
came
know,
to that and how you've experienced that edge.
I will say it was a courageous choice, and I thought long and hard about it. I discussed it at length with my editors, and I come from a background where I have a very diverse group of friends. I have a very diverse group of family members, and I was taught long ago that just because you're for something doesn't mean you're against everything else. I also understand that idea of, the jack of all trades, the master of none. And I also understand there's a real relevance to my own lived experience. So my lived experience has been as a feminine woman in a body assigned at birth, gender assigned at birth as female. That is who I can best help. And it absolutely does not negate all of the other expressions out there. But those other expressions aren't my personal lived experience. And while absolutely they deserve help, insight, support in any of these matters, I may not be the best person for them. But I do know that I might be the best person for people who are like me, who I've gone through a lived experience that is similar to. The research that I've done has really been in this particular area. And I think it's just an admission of strength and perhaps even an admission of where my strengths aren't. So in no way do I negate or select or I'm not choosing one over the other. I'm just really speaking clearly to those that I can best support.
That's speaks to me, and I think to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And thank you for having the courage to do
Yeah.
it, and your editors and publisher for, you know, allowing that, supporting
Yeah.
that. So I want to talk a little bit about the aspect of the satisfied woman. Um,
Sure.
and when I read that, I thought of the Rolling Stones can't get no
Oh, okay.
satisfaction. I
Okay.
ain't got no satisfaction.
Yeah.
And I think we all experience that edge. There are times when I just can't get no satisfaction, and
Mhm.
how do we do that? So talk a little bit about what that means for you and how you express that notion of, satisfaction, of the
I will. And actually,
satisfied woman.
I'm really excited to identify this with you because I believe it'll, I talk about this sometimes on other places, but I haven't run into many people who are familiar with it, but being in this arena you'll know, I'm sure, that seminal work of David Data, The Way of the Superior Man.
Mhm.
And that was written, what I think 30 years ago or so. It was one of the first books I read in this arena because, frankly, there are quite a few really wonderful supportive books for men in this area. There aren't that many for women. So as I was embarking on this book, I thought, well, what I really want this book to be is that foundational flexion point for the feminine at this time in our culture, in the same way that the way of the superior man was for men at its time. But of course, our values are different. Women aren't necessarily here to name themselves as being superior. It's not an alignment with some of our other core values. And when I started thinking about how am I going to be cheeky and identify that I'm adjacent but different, I landed on this word satisfaction, and I want to name it for you and define it for you because for me this was very much a mic drop moment. So satisfaction is defined as the pleasure derived from the fulfillment of your wishes and needs. So if we kind of unpack that just a little bit, everyone on the planet has to have their needs met. And one of the highest things that we can do is not only make sure we get our needs met, but to help someone else get their needs met. So that's a given. Wishes are the kinds of things that give life meaning. Joseph Campbell would say life has no meaning but what you bring to it. And your wishes, the fulfillment of those desires, are what really make life enriching. Fulfillment is perpetual. So traditionally in our dominant culture, we talk about success as being a very linear pathway, a very ascending pathway, sometimes at the cost of others, to the detriment of others. We're stepping over other people, climbing to the top. It's often very solitary and alone. Look, it has a masculine energy. I think it's a distorted masculine energy, but it is more on the masculine flavor than the feminine. Whereas fulfillment is much more holistic. It's about all the different parts of our life and it can evolve. And then that first piece, pleasure, the pleasure derived from the fulfillment of wishes and needs. Well, Jed, the feminine does pleasure. When the feminine feels pleasure, she feels it in her body. She lights up from the inside out. You can feel it in her fingertips. You can see it when a woman is pleasure filled. And this isn't just sexual, this can be intellectual when she's in an inspired conversation, when she's pursuing something creative, when she's dancing, moving, holding her children. Pleasure is alive inside the body of a feminine woman. And that's a feeling. And the feminine is rooted in feeling. And so I thought to myself, if I'm going to give women one thing to hang on to, it's got to be satisfaction because every day we need to wake up and feel it in a holistic way and know it in our bones that our life and our world is okay.
Beautiful. And what it reminds me of a number of things. It's kind of what you say triggers a lot in me. So, I wrote my first book, and I've written a number of books, and my first book is called Inside Out: Becoming My Own Man. It came out in 1983.
Oh my goodness.
Um, and for a long time, nobody would publish it because it
Yeah.
was so personal. And I was talking about, my personal life, what got in the way of satisfaction, what I was finding about being a real person, a real guy. And
Mhm.
publishers wouldn't publish it at first because they said, you're a professional, you should write professionally. It's too personal. And I was getting these long rejection letters.
Mm.
And I thought, oh God, I didn't think it was that bad. And then I had uh, a colleague who is actually associated with your publishing company, who was a colleague and friend who read the book and said, I see why people are getting upset because it's so personal. It
Huh.
just scares people to, recognize that. But that's an energy that I think we need to come back to. And women and men, I think, are hungry for that
Yeah.
in themselves. And when you find it in a partner or in a friend or a lover or all the different ways that we need to bring more love, more passion, more satisfaction to a
Yeah.
world that feels very out of balance, very disconnected from
Disconnected. I was,
ourselves, our energies, and the rest of the world. So
yeah,
I totally resonate with that and
good.
looking forward to seeing how that expresses itself in the work that we do. And there's a thing I want to just raise at this point because a lot of writers and people that are working in the field talk about the patriarchy and the
Yes.
problems with the patriarchy and the way in which, a certain type of maleness or masculinity is harmful, which totally get, but the language, as we talk about, is really important. And
Yes.
I've found that when we, use patriarchy as the bad guy, it unnecessarily distances men in some ways from their manhood, women seeing them as enemies. And I
Correct.
have a colleague, Rianne Eisler, who I've known for years and years. She wrote The Chalice and the Blade, which was
Oh
a
yeah, of course I've
very
read that.
best-selling book. And what she
Yeah.
says in there, she and I, were writing, our books came out about the same time, but she says this, I want to just quote this from The Chalice and the Blade. She says, underlying the great surface of diversity of human culture are two basic models of society. The first, which I call the dominator model, is what is popularly termed either patriarchy or matriarchy, the ranking of one half of humanity over the other. The second, in which social relations are primarily based on the principle of linking, may be described as the partnership model. And I thought that was, she and I, we met in San Francisco when
Yeah.
The Chalice and the Blade first came out, and my book had come out 4 years prior. And I said, that's, at a time when there was so much negative view in the world of the feminine about the masculine, she didn't do that. She spoke to a bigger picture that recognized that it's not the masculine or the feminine. Now, there's a backlash against feminine, obviously, as we know, but the way in which these two models of systems of culture, the
Mhm.
dominator model and the partnership model. And it feels to me like your book is so in the tradition, as was mine, and
Yeah.
other good books that we've talked about of partnership. And I wonder if you could kind of see what your reaction is to Rianne's quote of, rather than using patriarchy or matriarchy as
Yeah.
terms, that we use this larger understanding.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought it up. Sometimes I do use the word patriarchy only because it's the thing that everybody recognizes. It's the word that everybody recognizes. But I always am very quick and careful to clarify that the patriarchy is a hierarchical model. It's a model that really centers individualism, as in like DIY, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, do it on your own. And the patriarchal model doesn't serve masculinity either. It really distorts some of the best qualities of masculinity. So, really, no one is served by this model, whether we call it patriarchy, whether we call it the dominator model, whether we call it a hierarchy. And I'm not looking to go back to a matriarchal model either for the same reason, because hierarchy pits one thing above another, and in that way someone is always going to be a detriment, and no one is comfortable in that position. So I like to use the word relational. So instead of this individual model that the patriarchy or the dominating culture, which is another term that I often use, often emphasizes that kind of DIY mindset where, success at all costs, on your own, by yourself, for yourself, that's isolationist. And anytime we isolate people, anytime we say it's us versus them, it's actually a method of control. If you think about, for example, like the way that cults are developed, one of the first things that they do, or they isolate people from their support system, their families, from their connections. And that's how they then impose control and their own thoughts over someone else. So this isn't going to work for anybody. I don't care who you are. We as humans are built for relationship. We've gotten this far, evolutionarily speaking, because of the way that we work together, because of the way that we relate to one another. And with my background in psychology, one of my most favorite and very famous quotes in like the psychological world is that we are wounded in relationship and we are healed in relationship. And I know from my work in the spiritual world, which I was in for over 20 years, and psychology as well, one of the big narratives today is that we have to love ourselves. We have to heal ourselves. We have to be there for ourselves. We need to be everything for ourselves. We have to support ourselves. Look, you know, yeah, on some level, and on another level, good luck. Because there's only so far you can take yourself. There's only so far you're going to go by yourself, and you'll create a very comfortable little isolated world. But the reality is, we live in a world with other people, and we have to learn to work with them and be with them. And in terms of a feminine and masculine reality in our psyche, when we have a counterpart to our polarity, it's actually far more freeing and emphasizing and meaningful than if we're trying to hold those things both on our own. So I'm all for the relational model, or how does she term it? What's her name? What's her word for it?
She calls it the partnership
Partnership.
model.
Partnership model.
You
Yeah.
know, it's exactly what you're talking
But
about.
it's the
And
same thing.
I just build on what you're saying in that the nature of life
Mm.
on the planet, not just human life, but animal life, plant
Yeah.
life, all of life is relational. And I
Yes.
think part of the problem that humanity is having, that somewhere back, probably about 6,000 years ago, seems to be where we started viewing the world as something that we were separate from. I think,
Right.
my view is it happened as a result of some climate things that happened back
Oh,
then
okay.
that
Yeah.
produced, trauma. And there was a reaction to that, that males became armored and
Mm.
became cut off, and we thought we needed to dominate, the world in order to survive. And that didn't work, and set us
Right.
on a path that is destroying the planet, the relational planet, including us, if we don't change.
Yeah.
And I want to just offer this. I hadn't planned to do this, but it feels like it so fits with what you're saying,
Sure.
that there is another colleague, a woman colleague, named Clarissa Pinkola Estes,
Of
and she
course.
wrote a book called
Women Who Run
Women
with the
Who Run
Wolves.
with the Wolves.
That was the first one I read. I was
Okay,
13
well,
years old
what
when that came
people
out.
often don't know is she also, is a poet and a
Mhm.
storyteller. And I was at a conference with Clarissa and a man in the movement called Michael Mead, who
I love
does.
him. I went to Pacifica Graduate Institute and he
Okay, so
was
you know
often there
that
doing
name.
talks and we read his books in some of my courses.
So
Yeah.
if you can picture this, there's an event many years ago with Clarissa Pinkola Estes
That must
and
have been
Michael Mead
powerful.
at the San Francisco Center for Fine Arts, the Palace
Yeah.
of Fine Arts in San Francisco. And the title of the gathering was Ovarios y Cojones. Ovaries, and basically coming together of the masculine and feminine. So each of them told stories, and the people, I mean, it was male, female audience, very
Yeah.
connected. And towards the end, Clarissa says, I have a poem I'd like to share. And
Okay.
everybody, well, I didn't know she did poetry. And she offered this poem, and I'm going to share it with you because it so fits. And the poem's called Father Earth.
Hmm.
And when she said that, just the hair on the back of my head just stood up, just the notion, we're so connected to Mother Earth and
Mhm.
Father Sky or whatever
Yeah.
so this was the poem she shared. Father Earth. There is a 2 million-year-old man no one knows. They cut into his rivers. They peeled wide pieces of hide from his legs. They left scorch marks on his buttocks. He did not cry out. No matter what they did to him, he did not cry out. He held firm. And now he raises his stabbed hands and whispers that we can heal him yet. We begin the rolls of gauze, the gut, the suture, the grafts. Slowly, carefully, we turn his body face up. And underneath him, the old woman, his lover, is perfect and unmarked. He has laid upon his 2 million-year-old lover all this time, protecting her with his old back, with his old scarred back. and the land is fertile and black with her tears.
Wow.
Father Earth, Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And it's exactly that was the reaction when we were there. Everybody was in tears. And
That's
men,
stunning.
I've recited this at men's gatherings and others, and men say something that I'm sure touches you. Finally, there's a woman that gets something about men
Yeah.
and who we are on some very deep level that we had nobody's gotten before. And I haven't heard anything.
Ugh,
And Clarissa and I have been friends since then, and we correspond. And she's still telling stories and
yeah.
still doing this work. So be interested in just how you reacted to that, how that triggered in you, and anything that that brings up for you about you and your work.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's deeply moving. When I cited the Way of the Superior Man earlier as being kind of the foundational feminine work, I cite hers as the first work I know of being woman's work. I remember being 13 years old. It came out. My mother was reading it. My mother was crying through the pages. She handed it to me. Um, and so I've always really loved and appreciated that book. That poem is stunning, and the thing that it moved in me is, you mentioned at the beginning that one of the things I'm really careful to do in my book and my work is to not vilify the masculine, okay? Because the masculine is in pain too. Men are in pain too. You have been given this heavy burden of trying to shoulder all of it without ever having any crack in your emotional armor, right? That narrative of boys don't cry is difficult. It's constricting. And what it does, at least in my experience as a woman, is it protects everyone, us, the world, from what is true about the masculine, which is that you have big, big hearts. And when you find the feminine that you want to cherish, that beautiful body that you want to lay over, that's like the most precious thing in the world. That's the most precious thing in the universe. And it's one of the most precious gifts that the masculine can give to the feminine. And I think I'm moved because we are so bereft of it. Not because it's anybody's fault, but because we haven't been given permission or the training or the structure to really know that in our bones.
Well, thank you for being so expressive of your feelings. I could hardly get through the poem, and I've told it hundreds and hundreds of times
Yeah.
without crying again because it speaks so deeply, I think, to the wounds and the connection, the cosmic connection between the masculine and the feminine,
Yeah.
and in a way that brings us together and doesn't separate us. And
Well,
I just want to just share that uh, you talk about how can we connect, and one of the ways in my world that I've connected was that my wife Carlin and I have been together, not married now for 45 years. And we have between us six grown children, 17 grandchildren, and four
gosh.
great grandchildren. So we
Wow.
we are doing
Congratulations.
this work for the future generations.
Yeah.
And one of the things she will tell you is one of the main reasons she feels that we've had this long-term healthy relationship for 45 years is because I've been in a men's group that's been being meeting regularly for 46 years.
Wow.
Same group of guys. There were seven of us when we started. Uh, Four of the guys have died. Three of us are still alive.
Wow.
And I think part of what is needed are two really basic things that you recognize, and Clarissa and the other people that are in this space, male and female. One is men need to be, recognized and held by the woman and appreciate it. And we all come out of the body of a woman. We need to know that we're okay, that we're not
Hmm.
bad. The
Hmm.
second thing is I believe we need to be in the company of other men in
Yes.
order to really
It's critical.
be, ourselves. And
Yep.
Robert Bly, another
So
old
amazing.
friend and colleague who's since
Yep.
passed, had said that males, and he was talking about young men, but it's true for all males, need to be in the company of older men
Yeah.
in order to hear the sound that male cells sing. And I think that's such a beautiful expression of a reality
Yeah.
that male cells, every one of, I'm a male in my body, and there are 10 trillion cells, the biologists say, in the body. And if you're in a male body, every cell, well, billion cells are
Mhm.
male, every
Yeah.
cell. And if you're in a woman's body, every cell is speaking and vibrating to a female vibration. And being able to come together, as in the poem, I think is part of whether we're in whatever kind of relationship, heterosexual or other kind of relationship,
Hmm.
we need to come together in ourselves. Our world needs to come together and honor, both polarities. And feels to me like that's what your book does so well. And I'd like you to kind of build on, if you will, since we're coming towards the end of time, to
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing beyond, that the book's a part of.
Hmm.
That was, you said you made a big break from being kind of
I
doing
did.
corporate things and other, so I want to get a more of a feel, and for our listeners and readers to get more of a feel for where this ties in to the other work you're doing and where things may be going in the future now as the book comes out and other work that you're doing gets out in the world.
Well, thank you. Look, I have been very inspired by the men's movement, men's work. I absolutely recognize the power of men being together in this work and supporting each other in this work. Um, and it's honestly been the way that you all have actually been doing the work for decades that inspired me to say, you know what, women need this too. We don't really have this. And it was very interesting to do the research to find that out because I was certain there must be somebody out there doing a thing like this where we bring women together in this communal way and really support their process of becoming. I didn't really find any in my research. It's not that, there aren't any out there. I just didn't come across any. So my vision for this was to start with the book, to create a real foundation, also an easy access point for women to dig into the work of becoming a feminine woman, really fully embodied more and more. And I sold a business. It wasn't a corporate thing. I had my own thing. I sold it, and now I've got a new business, which is thesatisfiedwoman.com. And that's where I have an app, the Satisfied Woman app, where women can basically log on, be a part of a community, have conversation with one another. I'm in there supporting them. We have women's groups and circles in that app. I also do a lot of group coaching with women as well as one-on-one coaching with women. The thing that you may know about women that is challenging is that we are all very unique and nobody knows what women want is what they say, but it's because we all want something a little bit different. So it's been difficult in my work to create one really linear pathway. Women aren't linear. So instead I have more of a structure and I work with women individually on how they can find their own sense of satisfaction in the lives that they want to build for themselves. I have online courses as well, and I have why am I blanking on it? Yeah, online courses, community. Oh, podcast. I have my own podcast, the Satisfied Woman podcast.
Oh,
So I'm
super.
doing everything I can and as much outreach as possible to certainly bring women into this fold and awaken them to the power of their own satisfaction. And then anything I can to support them and building community where they can come together and have a safe space to work on this.
That's super. Well,
Thanks.
I'm pleased that you were influenced by some of the men's work
Oh,
and
yeah.
the men that have been in this field for a long time, as I
Mhm.
have, and others. And I just want to, say that part of what gave me the input into the men's work that I did started at a gathering. It was interesting. There was a gathering again many years ago uh, at a conference center in California, Silomar, that has all kinds of gatherings over the years. And this was one that was mainly a women's gathering that they allowed men to come to.
Okay.
And so my then wife and I went to it, and there were probably 1,000 women there, and maybe 20 men that were, that had the courage or the temerity or whatever to come. And it was a life-changing moment for me because part of the experience I had was one, I thought if there's ever a place that I'm going to meet some other men, because back then all of the energy of, you know, community and coming together was in the feminine world.
Sure.
Betty Friedan had written a book about the feminine mystique, and I thought, well, that speaks to me too. I want to talk to some guys.
Yeah.
So we talked that we were supposed to get into little small groups at the beginning. And I got in a group that was obviously mostly women because there are mostly women there. But then the instruction was no to be in same-sex groups. So I thought, okay. So then I was in a group of, maybe eight other guys. And I thought, okay, here's where we're going to talk about, how scary it is to be here with a bunch of women, why we were here, what we wanted from. Well, all these particular guys wanted to talk about was what men traditionally would talk about when we're scared and uncomfortable, but don't want to talk about it, which was, sports and who the cutest women were,
Right.
and I thought, oh God, and I was, I thought, well, I guess I'm so weird, and what encouraged me was that I met some women there, obviously, who were uh, lots of women there. And many of them encouraged me, said, don't give up. We need people like you. I'm glad you came. Thank you for being here. Don't give up. There are men like, and
Yeah.
so I kept reaching out and I found another guy that was there who was interested in starting a men's group.
Oh,
And I
cool.
started my first men's group. And the one I'm in now that's been going 46 years was my second men's group. So I really attribute the women at that gathering
That's awesome.
who are very oriented towards the feminine of encouraging men to don't give up. So if part of our not giving up has helped, women like you come in
It
who
all comes
can
around, right?
now, connect it with
Yeah.
women and men in another way. I'm glad the circle has come around again.
Yep.
So
Perfect.
anything final you'd like to share that we haven't covered or anything more about where
Um,
things are going with the work that you're doing and putting out in the world?
I think the only thing that might be that I want to touch on with the time that we have left is one of the things that I identify as I said, I don't have a linear path in my book because I can't. That's not how women function. It's not the nature of femininity, but I do have some foundational things. And one of the foundational principles I outline are something I call the four keys. That in order for a woman to be satisfied, which is that feeling, okay, that feeling of satisfaction she wakes up with every day, she has to have a sense of safety, meaning free from harm in mind, body, and heart. She has to have a sense of security, meaning that all her most essential needs are met, whatever they are. She needs to have trust, which for the feminine woman means to trust her own emotions and intuition. And she needs to be cherished by the masculine. And if that's inside her, as you mentioned earlier, that means having her logic and reason be in service to her emotions and her intuition. However, one of the most important factors about these four keys, and I want to say this here on your podcast because I know men are listening, is that the healthy masculine, you good men with your big, big hearts, have so much to contribute to this. And we need it, right? So, safety from the masculine side comes in the form of protection. And that's one of the highest masculine values. We love your protection. And even if that's emotional protection, any level of protection, we crave it. Security comes from the masculine value of providership. And anymore, yeah, women can make their own money. So it's not about just the guy going out and bringing home the bacon. Whatever it is you can provide, home, structure, comfort. Trust comes from the masculine quality of loyalty. And in partnership and relationship, that will mean that every action, every thought, everything you do has the highest interest of your partner and your relationship in mind, whether she's with you or not. And when we know you've always got our back, you're always holding us in the highest, we trust you and we will follow you anywhere. And that last piece, that cherishing piece, that's what kind of hit me with your poem. For the feminine to be cherished by a healthy masculine partner is the greatest gift in the world. And the masculine cherishes the feminine when he never leaves her alone in her pain without helping her come to a solution, because y'all are great at finding solutions for things. So that's what I wanted to maybe just speak out at the end
Yeah.
here to let you know that there is relationality, there is partnership. And really look, ladies, we're strong. Yeah, we got this. But that old thing that my mom used to say, Alanna, you don't need a man, we kind of do. We kind of do. And these are the reasons why. So I look forward to having your amazing good men with your big, big hearts hopefully hear this and maybe it triggers something in them and bringing them into the fold too.
Well, thank you. And they're out here and you will be connecting. I want to just say one final thing before
Yeah,
we end to build on what you were saying about safety is that, I write a regular blog that goes out to my newsletter and gets posted. And I wrote one a number of years ago that you always hope that something you write will go viral and
sure.
will
Yeah.
catch, and you never know. I write what is alive for me, but I wrote an article that went viral and started out on my website and then was on the Good Men Project and other places where this broadcast will go. And the title of the article was "The One Thing That Men Want More Than Sex." So just think about
That is
what
a
that
very
might be.
viral
Those of
title.
you that are out
Everybody's
there,
clicking
and
into that.
I can tell people you could look it up. There is that title of an
Mm,
article by Jed Diamond out there that has gone viral, and it's gotten over 4 million
wow.
reads in a very short time. It still is out there, but when it came out, and basically, I said that my experience, and it's just my experience, is that the one thing that men want more than sex is a safe harbor where
Mm,
we are seen and held and supported for who we are,
that's
which is not
beautiful.
so different from what women need. So I
Right.
think when men and women really can talk together in safe space, where we feel we can hear each other and be there for each other, we'll find that there are things that we thought were different that really are very much the
Yeah.
same. And there are things that we thought maybe were the same that, turn out to be quite different. And then clearly, as you said early on in our talk, we're all different.
Mm,
Every person is unique. And so there aren't any men that are all this way or women that are all that way or any other variations in between. So, Alana, I want to thank you. This has been delightful. I hope
my
we can
pleasure.
continue discussing. Maybe we can do another talk
I love that.
sometime. And
Yeah.
until then, we will say goodbye for now.
Thank you so much, Jed.
Thank you.